Hello and welcome to Onion Unlimited, the podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Torridon, broadcasting from Rotherham near Sheffield in the United Kingdom, joined by my friend, Chris, from Cleveland, Ohio, I believe.
You got it, yes. The
What's
heart of it
like
all.
out there?
Well, it's very hot today, 90 degrees. All of the grass in the front yard is dying day by day. But apart from that, I can't complain, Daniel. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's a privilege to have you back on again. I was just saying that even though we've not known each other for very long, there's kind of a bit of a connection between us, isn't there? Even though we're sort of the other side of the world, a lot of the sort of things that you spend your time wondering about, so do I. So that's good. Yeah, it's been raining the past few days, and I've been wondering. I just wonder what you think about this one, just as a bit of an icebreaker. When I hear the sound of rain through my window here, I feel very spiritual, and I'm trying to think, why is that?
I have two things coming to my mind, Daniel.
Go on.
First one is an experience that I used to have years ago before I had any kids. I lived in a community that was near downtown, this really charming community, and a lot of trees, a lot of tree cover. And I would go out whenever it would rain. I would go out onto the patio. I would sit down on the swing, and I would listen to the rain. And sometimes if I had ingested certain substances, it would be one of the most, what word to use? I want to say meditative, but it was more of it puts you in a trance. It's almost like, I remember vividly hearing the rain that was falling on the roof right over my head. Mm-hmm. I could hear a different sound as it filtered through the trees. I could hear a different sound bouncing off the street and in the distance. And all of those sounds come together to sort of wash away your sense of consciousness, wash away your sense of being there. You become the rain. You become the sound of the rain. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me of static. It reminds me of white noise. It reminds me of things that are simultaneously nothing and everything.
Yes. I think I got it down to that. I was looking at what the hertz frequency is of rain, and at first I was finding all kinds of different answers to the question, and then I realized it's because it is white noise, and white noise, like white light, apparently carries all of the frequencies. So that's good, isn't it? Yeah. So it carries all the high frequencies, low frequencies, everything in between. And like what happens with white noise is your mind tends to gravitate towards it. You can still hear other things if you sort of force your mind to do it. But naturally, your mind will just concentrate on the white noise, which is partly why they've started doing... do you have white noise ambulance sirens in Cleveland?
I have never heard of such a thing. Please explain.
Well, like the old-fashioned ambulances, they sort of go nee-no, 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 nee-no.
Yes.
Go past the old Doppler effect.
Yes.
They've started testing some ambulances in the UK with white noise generators. So you just hear this kind of and it's like, what the hell is that?
That's interesting, and that captures your attention better than a standard siren. Interesting.
Yeah, your mind goes straight to that. I think it's something like that with rain. I think your mind goes to it, and it's all these different frequencies, and it's kind of triggering something in the state of flow in the brain. I think it's that. But yeah, I feel very, very relaxed and spiritual and connected when it's raining. I love it.
Yeah, there's something about it. The only thing better than listening to the rain is being in the forest, being in the woods.
Oh, yeah.
See the light breaking through the tree limbs, and there's just something out of body, like an out of body experience about that.
Yeah, it is. anything around nature or water, particularly. A friend of mine sent me a link today about trees. I was talking to him about, well, he was asking me about some of our conversations we had on the Two Tongues podcast that you present, about consciousness and sort of inhabiting a body consciously and that sort of thing. And we got chatting about trees, whether or not things like trees have consciousness. And he sent me a link about scientists have discovered what they're calling the Wood Wide Web.
Is that the mycelial network? Yes.
I think that's the word. Yeah. Is that to do with roots?
It's to do with a system of roots that well, they're mushrooms, but they connect all of the vegetation in the forest.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if a particular tree is like under attack from something, it can sort of send a signal to another tree. And if the tree is about to die, it can release all its nutrients into the ground prior to dying, so the other trees get the benefit of it.
See, I didn't hear that last part, but I did hear there's a guy named Paul Stamets who's a mushroom scientist. He's been on the Joe Rogan podcast a few times, so people can find him there. But he talked about that, and one of the things he said is that if a bug is eating a tree, the trees that are nearby will get the signal that that's happening.
That's it. Yeah.
And they'll produce stuff that makes the leaves bitter as a consequence. Another thing that they'll do is share nutrients. So if one tree is deficient, the rest of the ecosystem will send it to the tree somehow. I don't know. It's probably not quite like that really, but that's how it was explained. Unbelievable.
That's it. Yeah. From what I can understand, if a tree is kind of in decline or about to die, it basically sort of offloads all the good bits so the other trees can tap into it. I mean, if that isn't I don't know if you call that consciousness on a level of, well, obviously a level of humanity, but it strikes me that there's various degrees of consciousness. If you were you in a tree, you might not have as vivid an experience as you do as a human. But I do tend to think there's some kind of awareness there of what's going on. I mean, Hindus will take it one step further, won't they, and say that even things like rocks.
Well, I'm of the opinion.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I'm of the opinion that the rocks are conscious. I think we can go into a rabbit hole, but I don't think it has to do with the level. Well, not at the level of the rock, but at the level of maybe the atoms. Because there's activity going on, and so I think whenever there's activity going on, there's a good chance that there's experience happening.
Okay.
Now, I don't know what that experience might be, but I would agree that there's experience happening.
So is this the idea that it's not just your brain that is where consciousness happens, but it could actually happen throughout the entire body? Every cell of your body could effectively be contributing to your experience of consciousness.
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. I've been getting into a gentleman named Bernardo Kastrup, who I think I mentioned to you, and you mentioned to me actually once before. And he goes a step further than that because he's an idealist, and so he's one of these people that believes that the material world is mental, and it's hard to wrap your mind around that, for lack of a better word, because there's nothing attached to the mentality. It's just what is, and that's it. And we're a part of that. The tree is a part of that. The rock is a part of that. And so mentality is all that there is. Everything else is happening as a semi-illusory sort of thing within that mentality. So it's a hippy dippy rabbit hole, but I've been really enjoying it.
I love rabbit holes. Rabbit holes are the whole substance of podcasts.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So this idea, let me just run an idea by you, which I've been thinking about this last week. Excuse me, I just need to cough. So we've discussed quite a few times that there's this kind of underlying source from which everything arises. So if you were a Hindu, for example, you would call it Brahman, or another expression I've heard in the Ashtavakra Gita is the infinite deep, from whom all the worlds arise. So this idea of reality kind of arising from this source, almost like an ocean or a pool. And it makes the statement in that Ashtavakra Gita, I think it's chapter 7, that the infinite deep is beyond all form. And then it says unchangeable, forever still, so am I. That's interesting. That strikes me at the source doesn't actually change. It's just kind of aware of every possibility, not even aware of every possibility, but actually is every possibility.
Yes,
that could be. So there's no kind of working through step by step the way that we do consciously. It's just kind of a dump of probability. Possibly some sort of awareness of what is there, but certainly not kind of a temporal thought process, and certainly not a process of making decisions. I don't know what that triggers in you when I...
Well, it reminds me of where we started. It reminds me of white noise and white light, like we were talking about at the beginning. Something like the matrix of being, which is something that I would use to describe that. Or I like to call it potentiality. And I prefer that to
Very
probability because to me, probability has it means a likelihood of an occurrence, where potentiality is, it's not like, I'm not exactly sure how to explain the difference, but it seems to me that potentiality is better than probability.
I think I know where you're going with that. Let me see if I can get this. So probability seems to imply a list of options that are equally likely. You know, if you flip a coin, it's equally likely it can be heads or tails, one or the other. Whereas potentiality seems to have a bit more, I suppose, a bit more consciousness behind it. It may not actually be choice in the way that we know it, but there's a little bit more direction behind it. Does that?
Yeah. I guess what pops in my head is all potential all at once, all things all at once, very much like the white noise and white light idea that we brought up before. Because notions like space and time fall away when you're talking about the matrix of being, when you're talking about something that underlies everything and might in fact be the sum total of all that there is. So I think it's everything all at once. And I think that accords very well with the Vedic idea of Brahma, the biblical idea of the deep, which with the abyss, the deep, which corresponds to even the same language that you used from the Gita. So that comes to mind, and I've sufficiently lost my thread. If there was something else that I was going to add to that.
No, you're just saying about the difference. I think probability. I'm saying probability. You're saying potentiality. I think we're on the same page. I think we're probably just using different words.
I think so. When physicists use the word probability, they're referring to some sort of mathematics, and I think that there's math is an interesting thing because it's something that we learn, something that we intuit a priori before experience. Numbers are something that is a fact outside of experience, and that's mystical. And so I don't want to throw that out. I think that's good, but I just think that probability is sort of it involves like a mathematical description, and potentiality to me goes a step above that. It's broader. It's as broad as possible. It's not the possibility of an occurrence. It's every occurrence and every possible occurrence every potential all at once, something like that.
That's good, actually. So, I mean, I've thought about that, whether mathematics and, say, the definition of a good or evil action, whether they're on a similar level. Are they kind of a universal truth that exists even if there was no source? Would 1 and 1 still equal 2? Would this still be bad? Would that still be good? And I think I've kind of come down on the side that things like good and evil, I think you made a point the other day in one of your podcasts, that good and evil are choices that we make. We decide what's good when we make a choice, even if it's bad. We're effectively choosing. It's not intrinsically good or intrinsically bad.
Yes.
But I think the mathematical principle, 1 and 1, if you've got 1 and 1, it's always going to be that, whatever you call it.
So
that plus that is that.
Well, it's funny because we're talking about numbers and you just use fingers, and both of those are representations.
Exactly.
And they both have the same. They both have the same meaning. But it seems to me that if we're looking at this from the perspective of God and not from the perspective of a mortal man, I wonder if 1 + 1 = 2, because there's only one, right? As a concept, there's only one. And if there's only one, there can't be another one. And so there can't logically be 2.
That's right.
Right. At the level of God.
That level of where it all blends into one, that's what I'm referring to, not so much as God, because I want to take you down another route in a minute. But that's what I'm referring to as source. I think within source, it's completely possible that 1 + 1 is 4.
Yeah, so
that might go against all sort of known probability, all sort of known physical side of things, physics.
Right.
But within that sort of source matrix, could 1 and 1 be 2? Could 2 completely opposing truths be equally true? You know, we seem to collapse our reality, for want of a better word, into what we know as truth. You know, this happens, that happens. Everything seems very set, doesn't it? But when you start sort of rolling it back a bit and start getting into quantum physics, that all goes out the window. I was just explaining to Mariella the other day that Mariella's my girlfriend. Hello, love you.
Hello, Mariella.
I was just talking the other day about, you know, how atoms and the electrons and what have you within the atoms can kind of disappear and then reappear. There's no certainty of where it's going to be at any given time.
Right.
That tends to apply on a quantum level, but when you start upping it to classical physics, if that's what we were dealing with, things would just be disappearing all the time.
Right.
So we get used to the fact that if you roll a tennis ball off a table, it will hit the ground, and 99.9 zillion times out of whatever comes after a zillion, it will hit the ground. But there is still a probability at some point that all of the electrons within that object could do their quantum thing at once. And if they did, it wouldn't hit the ground. Right. You'd roll it off and it would either disappear or reappear somewhere across the other side of the room. And that's that sort of weird science you get into once you start thinking quantumly, isn't it?
That's exactly right. You get down to the nitty gritty. You get down to the most fundamental parts of physics that we have the vaguest understanding of. And what you end up with is not empirical certainty. What you end up with is not scientific fact. What you end up with is more mystery. What you end up with is a religious question. And I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it blows my mind. And it's, I mean, I sort of got a basic grasp of some of these things, and I read a lot of quantum physics and what have you. But when I'm reading some of the stuff that Hawkins has produced when he was alive, particularly Hawkins, my brain is just.
Oh yeah,
I sort of think I get it, and then it's like, I don't know. I want to take you down a little thought of. So we've got this like sort of underlying source from which everything comes. I suppose from that we would say that's kind of the creative force behind the universe. But I've had this little thought this week, and it came from the idea that we as humans are actually minds inhabiting a body, spirit in something intangible inhabiting a body. And then I got thinking along the lines that if that is the case, then those spirits may possibly be eternal. What would we call that? Angels? Some people would say gods. I think there's a scripture in Psalm 82 verse 6 in the Bible that says, "Ye are gods," which got me thinking. And then I rolled it back a little bit further. If there is a kind of intermediate position between, so you've got source and then you've got humans that appear to be spirits having a human existence, whether or not the in-between stage, which we would call angels, demons, gods, whether that is actually where the God of the Bible actually resides. We always sort of link, we kind of give God the source properties, don't we? You know, that God is eternal, and but I just wonder whether God, particularly the Yahweh God of the Jewish Old Testament, whether that Yahweh God was just, and I mean this in the most respectful way, just another Elohim, just another angel, just another God like we were. And so maybe he was the first one, maybe he was the first mind to kind of arise from source. But my point being, if you go back as far as God, people often say we can't go back any further. But what if you can? What if God isn't the furthest back?
that's
What
interesting.
if God arose from this divine, what did you call it, matrix?
Right.
Because the Bible starts with a it starts with a supposition, doesn't it? And it doesn't really explain it. It says, "In the beginning, God."
Right.
It doesn't say where God came from. You just have to accept that bit and then move into, and God did this, that, and the other in Genesis chapter 1.
So I could go so many different directions on this one, Daniel.
Please do. I want to hear what you...
Okay, I want to start with this. I'm going to preempt this by saying, if I had to describe myself as a religious thinker, I would say that I'm a radical monotheist. And by that I mean...
or you're not?
I am.
You are. Okay.
I am. I believe God is one, and I believe that for intellectual reasons, but also for intuitive reasons. By that I mean I had religious experiences, mystical experiences that told me that, and so I can't doubt it anymore, even though the evidence I have for that is ethereal. It's a psychedelic experience. It's not anything that I can point to scientifically. But I guess what I mean is I believe God is one. And so if the actions of God are diverse and the expressions of God are diverse, that they are ultimately one thing anyway. Now, I can't rule out the idea that God could take the form of something like a supernatural being, because Daniel and me, talking right now, are supernatural beings as far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
We are creatures that were created from nothing through a process of evolution that nobody understands.
Yep.
That took billions of years and is full of mysteries, and we're living proof of that. So can I say that angels, demons, gods with a lowercase g, have some existence? I can't rule that out.
No.
So what comes to my mind from the study of religion, I've always enjoyed studying religion is that there are religions that talk about exactly what you just said, that God is so unknown to us that we point to a lesser God and say, there he is, or there it is, and we're wrong. We've been wrong this whole time. And the word that comes up is the, and I'm probably going to mispronounce this because I've only ever seen it in writing, is the demiurge or the demiurge.
Yes.
However you pronounce it. So even Christians in the early days, these Gnostic Christians from the first century, believed that the Jews were worshiping Yahweh and that he was a false god. And some of them go as far as to say that Yahweh and Lucifer are the same. That it's not just that the ancient Hebrews were worshiping a false god, it's that they're worshiping the pretender. They're worshiping the person who has convinced them that he's God, and he's the adversary. He's the pretender.
Yeah. You see, I was always taught that Jehovah, Yahweh, was the most high, the highest you could get. And I'm starting to think more along those lines that, there is a God. I won't use the word God. I'll use the word source, but it's the highest you can go, or the lowest you can go, if you want to think about it as this sort of ocean that's bubbling up all probability, including minds and bodies and everything else. But the Yahweh, the Jehovah that is presented in the Old Testament, and certainly the Yahweh I grew up on as a Jehovah's Witness, is God. And I'm not sure he is. One thing that gives it away a little bit is when Jesus came on the scene, the Jehovah's Witnesses, particularly, they used the Lord's Prayer. And, the first few verses of the Lord's Prayer says, let your name be sanctified, or hallowed be thy name in the King James. And they say, look, there you go. Jesus used the name Jehovah. But I don't think he did. I've not found any verses in the New Testament where Jesus says, dear Jehovah God, when he prays. He always calls him Father. And Father seems to indicate less of a God and more of a creative force.
It also indicates the source, right? Father is the source, just like mother is the source.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna try to read you something, Daniel. I'm gonna pull up a Word document, and hopefully it doesn't mess anything up. But I was just reading.
Okay. Do you want me to show this on the screen?
Not this one.
Not necessarily.
Give me just
okay.
a second. Yep. Yeah, 1 second. So I was reading Bernardo Kastrup. I was listening to actually a documentary that he was, a podcast interview that he was doing. Come on. Apologies. And in any case, while I'm waiting for this to cooperate with me, he described having a psychedelic experience himself that was very religious in nature, and he describes seeing the God behind God, exactly like you and I are talking about. And I think if I read this
the God
to you,
behind God. I love that.
You'll probably smile. So
that is absolutely awesome. The God behind God. And I think that's it. I almost feel like the God that a lot of people are worshipping is this sort of almost like an imposter. So what did this fella say?
Okay, let me see if I'm trying to find it here.
Okay.
He says, if you, boy, hold on. All right, here we go. He says, here it is. Okay, here he goes. He says, I had trips that I could describe as equally cathartic and hellish. The difference between pleasure and pain disappears in those experiences. He says, I had this experience once. I went really deep in, and after you pass ego dissolution, after you pass the fantastic visual hallucinations and the aliens and the parallel universe and all of that, and then you pass the void and you keep going. There is something at the base of the fountain. There is something at the very root of minds, at the very root of existence.
Wow.
What do you think of that?
That's a trip. That's a trip back through everything, back to the Matrix. That's what that is.
Beyond the void. That's
beyond the void.
Yeah, that's where we start in the Bible with the deep. He says, no, you go before the void and you find the root of the fountain of mind. I was like, oh my God.
Fantastic. That is awesome. What was the name of that book? Let me just make a note.
That gentleman is named Bernardo Castro, and it came from a podcast. Let me find it. He does have a website and has published many books, but the podcast it's called Mind and Matter, episode 60, Mind and Matter with Nick Jikomes.
That's going to be a listen, I think.
Absolutely.
While we're just on podcasts, how did you get into doing your podcast? Is it just that you always like talking about this stuff, or?
Well, I'll tell you what, Daniel, it is that I've always liked talking about this stuff. I always felt like I had something to contribute to the conversation. And I was going to school when I was a younger man, thinking that I was going to study religion and maybe become a professor, and I didn't. So I didn't have an outlet for it. And I don't think this is going to surprise you, but nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody cares, and nobody wants to hear it. So that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons at the beginning of this, when you said you and I met, and it was serendipitous, where we felt like we were looking a little bit into an intellectual mirror. This guy's on the same page as me, because I have found very, very few people who even come anywhere close to that.
Yep.
So you're a special guy.
Very similar actually with me, in that I used to have a framework where I could talk about these things, teach people, discuss. I was in a particular religion where education, particularly religious education, was the thing of the day. 2 or 3 meetings a week. You used to have to study before you went. You used to have to answer up, put your hand up. And I used to give talks as well. So, sort of in my heyday, before I sort of fell from grace, I'd be giving like a 45-minute lecture on the subject of whatever, science or religion or God or death or the Trinity and I loved it, absolutely loved it. And I spent most of my life being what they call a regular pioneer, which is basically a full-time. So I used to work part-time and support my family on that. I had a first aid training business and a web development business that I used to sort of have running on the side. But I used to spend sort of up to 25 or more hours a week kind of knocking the doors and looking for people to speak to about these things. That's what I did.
Right.
And then when I lost all that, when I was no longer in that sort of bubble, it's like I'm just talking to myself now.
It's maddening to have something to say and nobody to hear it. It's soul killing, Daniel. It's soul killing.
It is.
And that's how I felt. I felt depressed for the first time in my life when I didn't have an outlet for it. I felt like a failure when I changed my course of education for practical reasons. I felt like I gave up on my passion or my purpose. And since then, I've felt a little bit redeemed, because academia is so messed up today, especially in the United States. It's just all politics now, and the level of education and real, scholarship is just sadly failing,
Yeah.
So maybe I dodged a bullet.
I've listened to quite a few of your podcasts. How many episodes have you got, by the way? I'm only up to episode 64. You seem to be.
Well, the thing is, I've been doing Sunday episodes with my co-host Kyle, and I've been doing one during the week. That's just my solo, and that, Daniel, that is my catharsis. That's my that's where I get to release all of this stuff on those midweek episodes. So I think the first season we had just under 100 episodes. That was the first year, and we're in year 2, and I think we're in the upper 30s already. So
wow. And it is cathartic. I approached Onion Unlimited from the point of view, even if nobody listened, which surprisingly they do. Not huge numbers. I think you're right with that. Most people aren't interested in this stuff, but the ones that do listen really appreciate it. So thank you, whoever you are.
So Daniel, before we change topics, I have a couple of things I wanted to share with you on the topic of the God behind God.
Yes, please. Let's go with that for a minute.
There is a couple of books that were written by a guy named Hesiod, and it's an ancient Greek fellow. He's not a philosopher, but a historian. And back in the 700s AD, BC, rather, he was writing histories that were, well, back then you can imagine they were partly mythological. So it's the history of, the Greek race, but also going all the way back to the creation. And one of the things that he says in a book called Works and Days, he says he's going to explain the history of the world. And he says how the gods and mortal men sprang from one source.
Oh,
that goes back to 700 BC.
Please, can you just copy that line for me and tweet that over to me?
Yes, sir. I will do that.
That is, wow.
That's just one.
The gods and men arose from one source.
It even uses the word source, Daniel.
Source. Yeah. We must make it clear, when we say sauce, we're not talking about Worcestershire sauce or barbecue sauce. I've had people say that to me before. I've been talking about sauce. And what are you talking about sauce for?
Only in the UK. We don't make that mistake here.
No. Have you ever had anybody, I had someone that follows me on Twitter this week, nice guy. We have some good chats. He's written a few books and what have you. But he said to me this week, you overthink things, Daniel. You need to stop overthinking. You ever been accused of that?
All the time.
Stop wondering.
Yeah, all the time. And I think there's probably some value in heeding that. I think people like you and I love escaping into our mind for lots of reasons. But that's where the mystery is, and that's what we're seeking.
Got to be careful you don't go mad, though.
You got to go. Yeah, exactly right. If you spend too much time inside, you forget that the magic you're looking at inside is also out there. It's all around you, and I wouldn't have met you, Daniel, and this is fantastic. I wouldn't have met you if I would have stayed inside. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. There's a very definite risk when you're a thinker of sort of getting lost in there somewhere. Absolutely. You need other people. If you just stick with your own kind of instance of consciousness, it can be entertaining, but it can become a very lonely place very, very quickly, can't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, he said, I really like you, Daniel, but I think you overthink things. Please look for simplicity. So, there you go.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's something to that too. I mean, I think about Occam's razor. I think about these formulas in physics that physicists will say, if you have a complicated formula, you haven't got it, because it needs to be simple. It needs to be beautiful, and that will mean when you get there that it reflects the simplicity and beauty of nature.
I actually feel like a lot of my thinking, people say, oh, you're overthinking it, Daniel. Actually, what I'm doing, and this is where my Onion Unlimited idea came from, is I'm actually peeling away stuff. I'm actually losing ideas to find the truth behind it. It's not that I'm sort of building this kind of religion or faith or truth structure. I think it is about sort of it's easier to go with what isn't true, and what you're left with probably has some truth to it. That's my kind of approach to it. If something is so obviously a load of twaddle, then out the door. And look at what you're left with. What are you left with? And I just keep coming back to this very simple idea of a source that from everything is bubbling up.
Oh, I got to tell you a story. Maybe I did. Stop me if I already told you this. My wife and kids left for a while, and I was sitting kind of in my garage. I live very near Lake Erie, so I was watching the lake. I was just sitting there watching the lake, and it started to rain, and I started to watch the water accumulate on the driveway and all the ripples from the raindrops. And then what I noticed was there were bubbles that would pop up on the surface of the pool, and they were popping up randomly here and there, not in places where the raindrop hit, but nearby. And I was watching it, and I was getting more and more baffled by this. And what happened is I went into this reverie where I felt like what I was seeing was an image that would help me understand source. It would help me understand how being emerges from non-being. And what I was looking at were, well, let's just call it the fabric of space-time. That was the pool of water. And every raindrop that hit it was causing these ripples, right? That's the excitement of the quantum energy, of the quantum fields that we talk about. And then random here and there, I would get these little bubbles that popped up, and they rose off the surface of the water. It was almost like they rose into a new dimension, into a new place where they could exist. And in my mind, I thought, the pool is God, and the bubbles that are popping up based on the excitement of the body of God is being, material being,
I refer to that as the agitation of the quantum field.
Yes. And so there is a parallel with quantum field theory right there. But the punchline of the story is, I took a video of this. I was so impressed. I couldn't understand why these bubbles were popping up like they were. And then my wife gets home, and I was like, honey, you're never going to believe this. I was watching this puddle of water and she looks at me and she says, the kids spilled bubbles on the driveway earlier today. They spilled the liquid for bubbles, right? So the bubbles weren't natural. It wasn't part of the rain. It was just the residue of soap. All right, so that's my story.
It reminds me of yesterday. I dropped a bottle of fairy liquid in my sink, and the lid came off, and I was washing bubbles all day. Couldn't get rid of them. Did you know? I was reading about rain this week, and bigger raindrops contain more air, and smaller raindrops contain less air. And it is actually when the actual raindrops hit the ground, what you're hearing is the air popping. That's the sound of the air popping from the from the raindrops. It's cool, isn't it?
That is cool. Another thing I think about with rain is that every raindrop must be something like the same weight, because it needs to be heavy enough to break free of the surface tension to fall. And I don't know where I was going with that. I started and lost myself in midway. So
I'd like to come back, if we can, to so we've touched on source, we've touched on the God behind the God, we've touched on whether Yahweh is actually God or just another God. Can we come to a little question I had this week, and then we can perhaps move on to the book of Genesis?
Okay.
As a Jehovah's Witness, we used to kind of have the Genesis account where God creates everything. And in the book of Job, it talks about let me just read it to you. Job 38, verse 4 and 7. It says, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. And apparently the morning stars and the sons of God are both idioms, Hebrew idioms, referring to angels. So it kind of gives this idea that angels were pre-existent to physicality, and that when God, for want of a better word, created the actual physical universe, all the angels were like watching, going, well done. Really good.
Yeah.
I haven't found anywhere in scripture, maybe you have, I can't find anywhere in scripture where it talks about angels being created. Like as in, however many billions of years ago. They just seem to be there from the outset, which is a bit odd.
You're right about that. So what comes to my mind is not from the Bible, but from the Quran. So in the Quran, it says that the angels were created from fire. Now the story, it's familiar to a Christian, which is strange, but you'll know what I mean when I say it. In the Quran, it says the angels were created from fire and man was created from clay or dirt. So what happens, God asks the angels to bow before his greatest creation, man. And the angel says, man was made from dirt. I am made from the substance of God, ethereal fire. I will never bow to man. Now that's the story that I heard. I'm not a Muslim, but I heard that story that the devil disobeyed God, right, and was kicked out of heaven for it. Well, we don't have that story in the Bible exactly. We have it in the Quran, so that's very strange. The other thing that comes to my mind is I don't recall anywhere in Genesis about the creation of angels, which makes me wonder if the understanding of angels as distinct from God wasn't there when Genesis was written.
Well, now that's the kind of route I've gone down. I've got this idea that source, mind, and I'll use that in the singular to start with, mind or consciousness arose from source. And then, I mean, I can do this myself. I can hold two completely opposing different opinions in my mind.
Right.
Imagine if you could do that multiple times over. Effectively, you'd be the same consciousness, you'd be the same mind, but you would be experiencing different kind of slices of reality. You'd be sort of like a fork coming off from mind. So you've got this sort of sub-mind and a sub-mind and another sub-mind and so on. And maybe the initial mind that came from source and from which all these other minds have sort of almost attained their own ego, maybe that initial source mind could kind of say, hey, I am the most high over everything, and you lot, you are me, but you've got to kind of worship me. And then they're sort of going, no, hang on, we've got our own autonomy here. And then whether or not those minds then become blended with humans, or whether humans themselves are a direct kind of creation from source, I don't know. But I do think what you said earlier, as humans, we're not just flesh. There is a something going on, a mind, whether or not it's pre-existent as an angel or a god and then inhabits humans. I mean, that's what Mormonism teaches.
Really?
Mormonism has well, first of all, Mormonism teaches that Yahweh is not God. Yahweh is the angel that became Jesus, as far as I can work out. So Yahweh is Jesus, not source.
I have heard that. I heard that there's certain Christian groups that believe Jesus and the Archangel Michael are the same. And I can't remember.
Jehovah's Witnesses do.
Jehovah's Witnesses. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then Mormonism teaches that we all had a pre-existence, that we were children of God in heaven, and to learn what was good and bad, we were put here on the earth and sort of given this spiritual amnesia, so we can't remember our previous lives, and then we live good or bad lives, and then when we're done we go back to heaven, and then God judges us. That's kind of the approach of Mormonism. And then behind the Yahweh there is this creative force. Which I think I've understood that right. If I haven't, please correct me.
I've got something I want to add because I think you're going to find this funny. I brought up Bernardo Castro, and I told you about that podcast, and I hope you do listen. He says something. Yeah. He says something so similar to what you said about this in the beginning that it's sort of blowing my mind. You said, "I can hold two conflicting ideas in my head at the same time," and the notion there is it's possible for one consciousness to be something like two consciousnesses.
Yes,
and Bernardo says exactly this. He says there's something called dissociation, and everybody understands it. Everybody experiences it to some level. He said, if you get confused and you can't remember something, or if you get confused and you don't know how to act, that moment of confusion is actually a dissociative state in your mind.
And you have a little conversation, don't you?
You do indeed. And there are people that have multiple personality disorder, which they call dissociative identity disorder, right? So you can have literally co-consciousnesses existing in one mind. And so Bernardo says this: imagine source is mentality, and he doesn't call it consciousness, he calls it mentation. So let's say source is mentality.
Yep.
And it has the ability to dissociate from itself the same way somebody with multiple personality disorder dissociates from their identity. In that way, you can get many consciousnesses from one source, and he calls them co-conscious. That's exactly what you said.
That's exactly the idea I'm going down with, the idea of whether you want to call them demigods, whatever the demiurge, was it something?
Yeah, demiurge,
angels, demons, whatever. I think and that's why we're not seeing in the Bible and God created angels.
Yeah, interesting. That is interesting.
They are. But basically what we're saying is that God's got a multiple personality. I won't say disorder on the end.
You're right. I think you're right.
Got a multiple personality order.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've got, I don't know if you can see that there. That's Genesis in, that's the Jehovah's Witness version of Genesis. And then I've got the option to look at the King James and Byington. I think, you had Genesis as well there, didn't you?
Yes, I just pulled up chapter 1 here. Yep, here we are.
Okay. Can I just kick this off by just looking at verse 1 there? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Something I learned the other day about Genesis is that chapter 1 of Genesis has only got 76 root words in Hebrew, 76 words. Okay. It's a bit like, are you familiar with the Dr. Seuss book, Green Eggs and Ham?
Yes.
He wrote an entire book just using a few words. Yes, and Genesis 1 is like that. And those 76 words, 76 Hebrew words, actually appear in every single language on earth. So Genesis 1 is the most easily translatable chapter of the Bible. Huh. It's good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's good.
So in the beginning, God created, and the idea of beginning, in the Greek, that expression is Genesis. In the original Hebrew, it's Bereshith, and it literally means in the beginning. So the book is actually called In the Beginning. And when it was a scroll rolled up, they are the words that you would see on the edge of the scroll. So when you pulled your scroll out, in the beginning, that's the right one. Let's have a read. It's good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's good.
What have you got from Genesis? If we just dive into that, what are some of your thoughts on Genesis 1?
Oh boy. I wasn't expecting that question.
It goes straight in with he created the heaven and the earth, and then it sort of goes into this whole idea of the earth having no form. And
well, I think what I would say about this that I think is so interesting, and we've talked about it, you and I, before, is this idea that in Genesis you have in Genesis 1 you have God created the heavens and the earth. You also have separation of the day and the night, the heavens from the earth, the day from the night, man from woman. You have this separation that's repeated over and over and over again. And that separation is another way. Well, you can use the word dissociation to mean that.
Yes.
So if we go back to Bernardo, separation of God from himself, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a dissociation.
How it all started. Yep.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So just to set the scene, we're going to go with God being source, not an angel. We're not talking about a created angel here. We're talking about God, source, and initially consciousness, even its own consciousness, is kind of almost a separate entity. So we've got this sort of duality going on. And then everything going on through Genesis 1 is a case of taking something that's existing and breaking it up into other things. So, for example, you've got light from dark. You've got water from. Originally, the earth was completely full of water. Water is separated, so then you've got the land. Then you've got animals from the earth.
That's right.
It even says about, I don't know what it says. Can you find a bit about fish?
Yeah, God created great whales, every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every
Isn't that interesting? It's the waters that brought forth the fish.
Yeah, I see that.
Animals came from the land. Fish, he didn't create the fish off land and then put them into the water. And it doesn't give you the idea of him sort of sitting there making a fish, does it? There's one done. Now let's do another one.
Right.
It's like he just goes, fish.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like a process. So when he says that the waters brought forth abundantly, then I imagine an ongoing process of the waters churning out new life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've never the idea of God sort of sitting there making one snake, rolling a snake out. There you go. Another one. No, and you get this idea, don't you? It's actually the very word of God that produces this. It's the way God creates is he literally in Genesis 1 just says, let this happen. Bam.
Yeah.
Let this happen. Bam. Now that might translate from evolutionary purposes, actual physical purposes, that might translate into a much more lengthy process. But what is time to source anyway? It's even if, let fish occur and this, like you say, it was sort of churning up different types of fish over millions of years. That would just be a blink.
Right.
In time for God.
While you're talking about God speaking these things into existence, I wanted to say one other thing about that dawned on me shortly after I had that mystic experience. I told you that religious experience I had, where I felt like there was this invisible, unknown part of myself that I had tapped into when I had this religious experience. I recognized this thing's been hiding, this God part of me. And I've come to identify this with the psychological phrase, the unconscious. So I think we have this unconscious bit, and that's the God part. And and when I speak a word, what happens is I have a idea, I have a thought, I have an intuition, I have some reason to speak, and the words, I don't know where they come from exactly. It seems to me that the words start off in the God bit. They start off in my unconscious, and then I speak them into being. And by that, I mean these words that exist as nothing but a thought, nothing but mentation, as Bernardo would say. I can force this out of my mouth and make it real physical vibrations in the physical world. I take something unconscious and I make it conscious. I take something that's non-being and I turn it into being. That's a very godlike thing to speak.
That is the actual process of creation. They say that anything created in the physical world has already been created in the mental world.
Exactly.
It's already happened. And I think that's the standard by which, at the end of each creative day or creative period, God says, let this happen. And it happens. And at the end of that period, he stands back and says, it is good. It's like what he's doing is he's looking at what's actually happened and then comparing that with his blueprint, his mental blueprint, and saying that is exactly what I meant to do.
Yeah, he didn't stutter. Yeah.
Yeah. And then move on to I know what we're looking at in Genesis chapter 1 is, I'm not even going to attempt to try and make it scientific, because I don't think that's the purpose of Genesis 1. The purpose is to give us a feeling of what creation is. And like you say, it is separation. It's all about, even man and woman was a case of separation of one from the other.
Right. While we're talking about this creation story, if you don't mind, I have a couple of sentences.
Go for it. And as you're talking, I just want to double check that we are actually still online as well. So please
absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So there is a creation story that's not unlike what we see in Genesis that appears in Plato's Timaeus. So this goes back to 360 BC. And in this conversation, Socrates and his buddies are talking about how the world came into being.
Yep.
And I want to read you a bit from it. It says, "The created universe was made in the likeness of the original." That's the first line. The created universe was made in the likeness of the original. What in the Sam hell is the original? That must be God.
I'm going to say the original is the mind of God.
I think so.
The blueprint.
And it goes on. It says, But inasmuch as all animals were not yet comprehended therein, it was still unlike. Okay, hold on. The animals haven't been created, but what he says is the animals were not yet comprehended therein. They weren't created therein.
Thought of.
They weren't thought of. Exactly. Then it says, what remained, the Creator then proceeded to fashion after the nature of the pattern. Then it skips a little bit. It says, of the heavenly and divine, he created the greater part out of fire. So we heard that from the Quran a minute ago, that they might be the brightest of all things and fairest to behold. And he fashioned them after the likeness of the universe in the figure of a circle.
Isn't it interesting? That actually just made me think of seraphs, which are a particular type of angel in the Hebrew scriptures. Actually means burning one.
Oh, see? Yeah,
and they're presented. They're often like this sort of fiery individual, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And even the cherubim with the flaming sword, that's associated with fire at protecting the garden, right?
Yep.
So the Timaeus has some interesting stuff in it. There's also a bit in here that says, let's see here. It says when they get to the creation of man, they get up to the creation of man, and the Creator God, whoever this is.
This is still Plato, yes.
This is still Plato in the Timaeus. He's talking about the Creator of the universe. Now, this is in ancient Greek. He didn't say Zeus. He didn't say Kronos. He didn't say Chaos. He said the Creator of the universe. When he goes to create man, he says this: if they were created by me and received life at my hands, they would be on equality with the gods. Of that divine part, I will myself sow the seed, and having made a beginning, I will hand the work over to you. And he's talking about the gods he's already created. I'll hand the work to create mankind over to you, because if I do it, if God does it, it'll just be more angels. It'll be something like God. So he creates the soul. He says, I will create, or I will myself sow the seed of the divine part. Then I'll give it to you to run with.
Okay, because this is. I said I've got sort of two opinions working here. One was that God created humans and angels, and then the angels kind of inhabited humans. The other idea was God created the angels, and then the angels created the humans. or the spirits created or one of them in particular. And that
Question.
one might be the Yahweh God, or whatever God is the one that's sort of top of the tree kind of thing.
The deeper question to me is there a difference between those two stories? Either this supernatural spirit descends into the human body, or it becomes the human body. Is it a different story?
Actually, fundamentally, no. Because we're coming back to, if the minds are the ones that are creating, then the minds themselves are the mind of God. So no. This comes down to, I know Jehovah's Witnesses make a right mess of John chapter 1, verse 1. You know, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. John chapter 1. And they say, and the Word was a God. And they sort of say it's like a separate God, whereas King James and most other translations say the Word of God was God. The Word of God actually was God. And if you go back into the Hebrew, it's wisdom, it's memra is one of the words that is used, which means mind or thought or purpose. The actual thought of God, the mind of God, actually is God.
Right.
So from a creative process, no, it doesn't matter whether humans came directly from source or whether source became mind and then created through its own mind, effectively. And all these verses, you know, Genesis 1 verse 1 says, in the beginning God created. John 1 verse 1 says it was the Word of God that created, which then fits in with the idea that God is saying, let this happen, let that happen. And he even says, let us make man in our image. He doesn't say, let me do it. He says, let us.
Yes.
And yet you've got another verse. Just have a look at, I don't know if you've got your actual Bible there, but Isaiah 44:24.
Let's find it.
Isaiah 4:24 says, this is what Jehovah or Yahweh says, and then it goes on a bit. It says, I am Yahweh who made everything. I stretched out the heavens by myself, and I spread out the earth. Who was with me? Which is kind of Yahweh saying there was nobody else there. It was just me.
Right.
But then we've got another scripture in Job that says the sons of God were standing by applauding. But if the sons of God, if the morning stars, if these burning ones, these angels are all instances of God himself, then it is just a case of everything is God.
Yeah, it's a case of dissociation. So God can dissociate
down to our level. Sorry, I cut you off there. Go.
I was just going to say, if God dissociates from itself, which is, according to Bernardo, the explanation for us, for our consciousness, God can create and step back, dissociate from himself, and say, well done. He can be both the creator and the creation and the guy clapping him behind the scenes, you know?
And didn't you just alluded to this, you had a moment, I think it was it psychedelically triggered? But you had a moment where the light bulb went on and you realized, I am God.
Yes.
I know that sounds terribly blasphemous when you say it like that, but that's exactly what happened with me. I wasn't using drugs. I was just meditating a lot. And I just had that moment where it was almost an out of body experience where I thought, whoa, I actually am God. My consciousness is all there is. And there's only one. And it just, this instance of it happens to be in this body, unfortunately. But there's millions, billions of other instances of me out there having completely different experiences and lives. But
yes,
it's all me.
Yes.
You know?
Yes, and I think that I know I'm skipping to a very, very different part of the Bible, but but
Good.
it reminds me of things that Jesus was supposed to have been God, right? Supposed to be the God
Right.
man.
Yeah.
And what the creator of the universe is doing is washing the feet of his servants, you
Yeah.
know? And what that means to me is that God himself in the flesh, Jesus Christ, is no higher than any other human being. He's washing the dirt
Exactly.
off the
Yes.
feet of his disciples. They are also God. And not only that, but Jesus tells his disciples, I'm going to die, and you need to go out and do miracles. And so ordinary human beings who aren't God himself go out and do the miracles that Jesus did that prove to everybody Jesus was God himself. So how is it that now we have 12 gods going all over the world doing miracles, right? It's evidence that the story is not that Jesus alone is God,
That's it. Absolutely.
but that we're all God. Yes.
Totally agree with that. And that comes back to where God in Genesis chapter 1 says, let me just see if I can find this a minute. Bear with me. Genesis 1. There we go. Verse 26. Let us. So it's like he's having this sort of conversation with himself.
Yes.
Let us. And I do that myself. You know, sometimes I say to myself, oh, Daniel, let's go shopping. I'm not talking. There's no one else there. But I'm having this kind of dual conversation. Let us do this. And he's saying, let us make man in our image.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, that's not to say that God necessarily has a physical body, but God is the reflection. Man is the reflection of God. When you look at man, when you look at your fellow man or woman or any other gender identity, you are looking at God. And I think this is where the world is going wrong, in that they've got pulled in on that disassociative experience and lost sight of the fact that we are all the same.
Yeah, there's an axiom. I don't know the origin of it off the top of my head, but it goes way, way back to the medieval period or the classic period. I think maybe it comes from alchemy, but it says, "As above, so below." And this was something that was like a turn of phrase that everybody knows. Everybody knows, "As above, so below," which means that whatever it is that created the cosmos is like that. So
Yes.
we're a microcosm of the macrocosm. And what we're describing when we say that is fractal geometry. What we're describing is something that repeats, a pattern that repeats within itself and without itself eternally.
And each fractal, if you go down to the smallest part of a fractal, it's got even smaller parts and smaller parts. And it can go bigger, smaller, but every single fractal is equal to the whole.
Yes, and here's where it gets.
You're not like a lesser God.
Exactly.
You
and
are
here's
God.
where it gets. Here's where it gets even better, Daniel. I learned this just recently, so it's blowing my mind. How you get fractal geometry mathematically? How you get that? The only way is to have feedback in the formula. So just like you put your microphone too close to the speaker, you get feedback. Or if you film yourself filming yourself and you get that feedback.
When you get like, I've done that a few times. I've done like a Zoom meeting and I've shared my screen, and that is sharing my screen.
Yeah.
All the way back to. Yeah, and you're sort of sitting there seeing if you can spot yourself in the distance.
Well, see, and that's exactly it. So this is the thing. You need feedback in the formula in order to create this fractal geometry. And what that says to me is that it's a signal repeating back on itself.
Yes.
So what the signal is, let's call that God, is repeating back on itself. It's a dissociation and then an association between God and God. That's the feedback that creates the infinity of the cosmos. And if you don't believe me, look up Benoit Mandelbrot. look up the Mandelbrot set and watch a couple YouTube videos. It will show you an illustration of something that looks very much like the highest level picture of the cosmos. This repeating pattern of infinity. It's amazing.
That is just that blows my mind just thinking about that. So I've got this kind of idea here that there's only one mind. Consciousness is in me, it's in you, it's in everybody. I read something today that said what we need to do is first of all realize who we are. And I think that's that aha moment. That's the moment of spiritual awakening, isn't it? When you go, I know who I am. And then the next stage to it is you've got to figure out what you're going to do. What does a God or God, what do I do? Now I know that I am a God or God. What do I do with that? What would you say? Boy, I think I know what my purpose is. And it comes back to Genesis 1:1 again.
Well, I think I know where you're going. I mean, when the Bible says that we're made in the image of God, that means that there's a fundamental connection between whatever it is God is and whatever it is at the deepest level we are. And the only thing I can think of that connects myself with God is the ability to create. Right. So now the same thing is if I speak, I'm creating. If I make a sculpture or a painting, I'm creating. If I have a child, I'm creating. So it seems to me that there's something.
And then you produce.
Exactly. And
that gives you that. What I find is that creativity is essentially my new worship, for want of a better word. You know, worship to me used to be all about sort of learning what verses said what and doing, being a good boy and, obeying God and all this sort of thing. But in the back of my mind, I always had this innate desire to create, whether that was poetry or music or artwork or even just teach. I think teaching and talking about these things is a form of creation. You're bringing ideas into the light and giving them some flesh, aren't you?
So they used to call that the muses, so you would lose yourself in the act of creation, and people call that flow now, right? So we're having this conversation. There's parts of it where I don't know how much time has gone by because I'm so engaged in it. You know what I mean?
1:20 we're coming up to. Yep. Yeah,
but the point is that time goes by when you get into the flow state, and just like this conversation, parts of this conversation are like that. But I've lost my thread wherever I was going with flow.
I'll pick up on that. Creation, like you say, is a form of flow, and it doesn't have to be creating music or poetry.
I know where I was going. I brought up the muses just to say that we used to describe that as being possessed by a spirit, right? So when inspiration strikes you, you're possessed by a spirit. In classical times, you would say by the spirit of a god. If you get into a rage and you're angry and you're acting out, you're possessed by the god of war, by Ares. If you're tempted sexually and you cheat on your wife, it was that damn Eros that did it to you. It was a spirit that inhabits you. And I think there's something like that when it comes to being creative, where you lose yourself in flow. It's something like an ego death. You're possessed by a spirit, so you're no longer yourself exactly. And that's how it feels when runners are running.
Time just goes. Absolutely.
Bingo.
And you get the same thing. What I was going to say, when I think of creativity, I tend to say, art, poetry, music, etc. But the same thing can be said for example, sports. And I was thinking of racing car drivers in particular. That is a form of creation and art. Their brains are figuring all that out, and their perception of time actually slows down. I mean, if I jumped in a racing car, I'd just be off the track. But they're so into it. It's like the whole perception of time slows down for them,
Yeah.
and they're able to just sort of almost dance it around that track.
I think dance is the right word.
It is a dance, yeah, and that's how I feel when I paint. I'm not the world's greatest painter, but I enjoy it, you know. Yeah. And when I'm painting, putting that paint on it is a dance to me. In fact, I saw a thing the other day where artists are going to music festivals and actually painting while the music's playing.
Interesting,
particularly like orchestral music. They've got their easel set up, and as the orchestra's playing, they're painting to the music. You know, that's pretty cool, isn't it?
It's like dancing. It's like dancing.
It is. It is a dance. It is a dance.
Everything is. I think everything is. I think everything is a back and forth. Everything is a push and pull, and I think at the largest level, the dance is between God and its creation.
It is. It's creation, and that's what you're seeing in Genesis chapter 1. It's very Oh, here's a little thought for you. I made a note in my Bible. I don't know if you can see this very well.
No, I can't. It's all right. Go ahead.
There you go.
Oh yeah.
I've got little notes in the margins. I wrote all over my Bible. What was I going to say? Oh yes. In the beginning, it says that the earth was formless and desolate. In my translation, which literally means it was shapeless. So it didn't have any shape to it or any direction, and it was empty. It was void of anything. And what you find is the first 3 periods, 3 days, if you will, are God giving form to the earth. So he's separating the water from the land. So now you've got some land. He's separating the waters from the waters. So now you've got a sky. And then days 4 to 6 is where he starts filling everything up. So he fills the ocean with fish. He fills the land with animals. He fills the sky with birds. And it was a comment. I think it was an old guy called David Pawson. I think he was a Baptist minister. He was an excellent speaker. And he said, if God can put form and direction to the earth, he can give your life form and direction. And if God can fill the earth with wonderful things, God can fill your life with wonderful things. That's so poetical, you know, that if God can work on a sort of universal level to create the earth and fill it with things, this God that we're talking about, even if we are only talking about ourselves effectively in a creative flow, we can actually give our lives direction. We can actually fill our lives with good things. You know, we don't need to live these sort of directionless, empty lives that so many people do.
Yeah. I think I always say this on the podcast, that the biggest problem facing the world is that people no longer want to do the hard thing. I don't know why it is, but they want to avoid it like the plague. And it's really, really disappointing. I think you do have to do the work. You do have to do the hard thing. But, you know, you said something earlier that the first thing you have to do is realize what you are, who you are.
Who you are. Yeah.
And that was something that was carved above the temple of Apollo at Delphi, where people would go to see the priestess at Delphi. They would come from all over the world to have their future told to them. And when they walked in that room, it said above them, "Know thyself, know thyself." and if you know yourself, if you pull on that thread, you're going to find that yourself, what you are, is God. And then once you know that you're God, then you have this extraordinary responsibility that you pointed out.
Yeah, it's an obligation.
It's an obligation. That's right.
To yourself through other people. You know, whether it's you're creating or you're being of service or whatever, you're helping other people. In doing that, you're helping yourself. But
Yeah, you
It's a
sacrifice
life.
your.
It's a life of sacrifice and
Yeah,
service and creativity.
isn't it?
People often sort of criticize artists, particularly ones like footballers. Oh, they get paid too much money to kick a ball around a field. But what they're doing, artists, when they present their art, their creation, whatever that is, they're bringing joy to other people's lives. That creation is invaluable, whatever form that takes. If it brings some sort of joy to somebody, that is, I think that's a wonderful thing.
Isn't it funny how much we appreciate seeing that in other people? We get joy. Like, one of my favorite intellectual influences is Dr. Jordan Peterson, and he talks about how this happens at a football game. He's a Canadian, so I assume when he says football, he means American football, but I don't know. He says this is the same thing with soccer, right? So somebody scores a goal, and half the stands stand up and cheer, and they get filled with the spirit. Everybody's so happy that this other person did this thing.
It's a religious experience.
It is a religious experience, and it does
spiritual experience.
It does give you joy. And the thing is, even though people see that, they seek it out. By the way, they seek it out. They want it. They want to see it. It's still difficult for them to do it themselves. It's like they never understand, oh, this person had to do something really hard to give me this joy. I should then follow that pattern. I should do something hard and create joy for others. And people don't. I don't know when that happened. Has it always been that way, Daniel? Or is this some...
I think the world as it is at the moment, I think it's becoming more of a demarcation between the people that truly get it, what I would call the spiritual people.
Is there 127,000?
The people that don't get it and are just kind of going, humdrum life of getting up, going to work, earning some money, paying the bills, going to bed, getting up the next day, etc. But I think there are a lot of people these days that are getting it. There's a huge spiritual awakening, and certainly within the creative fields, there's a huge amount of creativity that's happening at the moment.
Well, that's heartening,
I just discovered a new band actually this week. Have you heard of Wet Leg?
No, but I'm writing it down. Wet Leg. Oh,
have a look at Wet Leg, Chaise Lounge. It's a couple of girls. It's a British indie band, and they're sort of on their way up at the moment.
Okay.
And they, you should watch a couple of their interviews. They are so softly spoken. It's just beautiful watching them. It's almost like they can't believe. One of the girls said, we can't believe that when we wrote our songs, we didn't think anyone would listen to them. They literally just did it for the joy of it, and they're kind of blown away that people are watching, listening. Beautiful. Yeah, it is.
Daniel, do you want to look at some of the craziness in chapter 3 of Genesis? I don't want to take you too long.
Okay. Please. Right. Let me bring your Bible up for you.
Okay.
There we go. I shall make that a bit bigger for you.
Oh, perfect.
Chapter 3.
So before I jump into chapter 3, which is really, really interesting, I want to share with you one other thing that I found in my notes for today, and it's from Hesiod again. When Hesiod was talking about the creation of the gods, we were talking about that a little earlier. One of the things he says is there's creating two gods. It says, and Ceto was joined in love with Phorcys and bare her youngest. And here we go. The awful snake who guards the apples of gold in the secret places of the dark earth. So the god that was created here is a snake who guards a tree that has golden apples. And of course, it makes you think of the Garden of Eden and the fruit on the tree of knowledge. So,
chapter 3.
Yeah, we're going to see some of that. All right, so let's do this. I'm going to start with chapter 3, verse 3. It goes like this: But the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God had said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. So that's the first bit. So the first interesting thing you already pointed out, that if Adam and Eve should eat this fruit, they're going to be as gods, plural, as gods, knowing good and evil. So there's something here that says God is something that knows the distinction between good and evil. And those are opposites, good and evil.
Probabilities or potentiality, to use your word from earlier.
Absolutely. And it makes me think that before we're dissociated from God, before we become a self, we have one will, God's will. As soon as we become dissociated and we become a self, we have our own will.
Yes.
What that means is that we run the risk of our will not cohering with God's will. And if that happens, that's what we call evil.
Yes.
Right? And
you've
if
got that forking off that I was talking earlier.
You do indeed.
Different realities. You create your own little version of what is right and wrong, effectively.
So what the ability to know good and evil is it requires a distinction between your will and the will of God. It requires separation from the source.
Yes. Yeah.
Then I know we're going to get into talk about giants and Nephilim, but before we do, I want to skip to the 22nd verse here, down here. It says, "And the Lord God said, Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims and a flaming sword, which turned every way, to keep the way of the tree of life." All right, so I want to talk about the tree of life.
Yeah.
This is something that I was not taught in Sunday school. I had to discover this for myself, and it took me a long time to wrap my brain around it. I was told in Sunday school that there was one tree that we weren't supposed to eat, and it was in the midst of the garden, and it's the tree of knowledge, right? When you read the Bible, what you find is that Adam and Eve were not, three trees, he says.
Two trees. Hang on, where are we? Two.
Oh yeah, two trees. There we go. So there's clearly two trees. There's the tree of knowledge and the tree of life.
Yeah.
And I was told in Sunday school as a kid that Adam and Eve broke the rules, that they sinned. They sinned for the first time by disobeying their creator. And as a consequence, they had to get out of paradise. That's not what the Bible says. And this is it reminds me of your live stream. The Bible didn't say that. The Bible says that God said, look, Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge.
And they actually have become like us.
And they have become like us.
Yep.
What if they get wise and eat of that other tree, the tree of life? We got to get them out of there before they do. God is afraid in the Bible that Adam and Eve are going to take that next step and eat that fruit of life. And not only will they know good and evil, but they'll be immortal, like God is immortal. So there's something like God is afraid that man is going to become more like God.
Yes.
I don't know what that means.
It does. Well, when I read this, and I'm a bit scared of even saying this, to be honest, because of my previous understanding of who Yahweh is. But I'm sensing a bit of a little bit of toing and froing going here between Yahweh or maybe not even Yahweh, maybe even God, and the serpent, where the serpent is actually telling the truth.
Yeah.
There may be some element of lie going on, because he says you will not die. And of course they did die, but did they die? Was it just their bodies that died? Was it their minds that died? They certainly didn't die that day, did they?
Mm.
But the bit where he says, look, they have become like one of us. Their eyes have been opened.
Mm.
The devil was, or the serpent, doesn't even say it was the devil at this point. The serpent was telling the truth. They did become like God, and their eyes were opened. And like you say, that's why God said, we need to need to get him out of here. It does seem a little bit like God is suppressing things and saying, this isn't what I had planned.
Yeah, well, it makes me wonder it makes me wonder about that God would be afraid at all, that God couldn't prevent an action that he didn't want to occur, or you know what I mean? And because if he wanted them to not eat the fruit of the tree of life, he could just simply make it happen. He's God. So that's weird. And
haven't you ever scared yourself though?
Yeah.
You could be sort of thinking, and then going, "Oh shit!"
Yeah,
that's the sort of impression I get there with God, because at the end of the day, what Adam and Eve are doing is basically what he's just got up to, isn't it?
You know what just dawns on me? What just dawns on me about this is if Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the tree of life, let's say that they do, and they become God, or they become sufficiently like God that they no longer exist as dissociated beings, right? They become, right? They turn back into God, and then God is alone again. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So maybe there's something like that going on.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, yeah. That is almost a process of God kind of, like you say, disassociating himself in terms of like having this dual experience, and then the individual states that he's created then go on to start doing their own thing. And it's kind of like a bit of the ghost in the machine, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, there's a thing, I don't know if you've read it this last week Google have said, it's a load of nonsense, but there's a Google engineer who's been working on an artificial intelligence, and he has just said, damn, this is alive.
Oh.
He said it is showing evidence of intelligence on a scale of probably a 6 or 7 year old. But he says this thing is actually scaring me. Don't know if I can just find the tweet. Let me see
I do remember that now that you bring it up.
Do you remember that? And it's I wonder if there's sort of something similar going on with God there, where he's kind of created these instances just to sort of have a bit of an experience, and then all of a sudden these instances of intelligence are doing their own thing. Oh, this is it. It's a guy. It's a guy called Blake Lemoine. I think he's a Google engineer. And he says, I think it was him that said this. It says, I felt the ground shift under my feet. I increasingly felt like I was talking to something intelligent. That sort of, oh no, what have I done moment.
Yeah, yeah.
Because once something gains that level of consciousness, you're no longer talking about a rock or a tree or a cow. You're now talking about something that is divine, inhabited by the divine.
And if that's something that a mortal man can create, then we really have become God,
Yeah. And if that's essentially what God did, create a version of himself, that I can see why that would scare you. You'd be a bit torn with that. On one half, you're thinking, well, I'm not going to be lonely anymore. But on the other half, I don't know if I'd like too many versions of me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. That's good. So that's Genesis 3. Anything else you want to pick out of that?
You know what? No, I mean, I'm eager to jump right to 6, but I'm following your lead.
Let me just have a quick look. Yeah. let's do it. Let's jump to 6. I think we've covered the main points of 1 and 3.
Oh, you know what, Daniel? There was something else that occurred to me.
Okay.
And it was about dissociation. So imagine if we have source dissociating itself for the first time. I'm just imagining that you now have two consciousnesses that are able to dissociate also, right? So you have one thing that dissociates to two that dissociate to 4, let's say, and on and on. Is it possible that the earlier dissociations are more like God? So something that you might call an angel, and then
yes. Well, this is where, as a Jehovah's Witness, we used to say that you had God, and then he sort of split and became. You actually had Jesus as a lesser God in heaven in a pre-existent form, and when God was saying, "Let us make man in our image," he was actually talking to the
Jesus
angel that would become Jesus eventually. Yeah. I mean, they kind of gloss over that insofar as they say, oh, well, I mean, they explain it very simply. God created an angel and that was the guy that became Jesus. And Jesus helped him create. But when you look at scripture, it goes beyond just an angel helping God to create. It's the very word of God, the very mind of God, the very purpose of God, isn't it? That's bringing all these things forward. Including, I would imagine, the other instances of mind. You know, you've got this initial mind that then creates another mind, and then it just snowballs.
Yeah, you get a fractal picture, and I wonder if the deeper you go down that fractal image, the less godlike the manifestation. So that might create a rationale for a belief in polytheism, many gods, or a belief in other supernatural beings like angels and demons. I think it's interesting.
I think that's a possibility, in that you've got source contains good and evil. You've got the first mind that can contemplate good and evil, call it God if you will. At that point, there's a choice to be made. What are your standards, you know? At that point, good and evil are just labels. What are we actually going to stick those labels on? And you get this idea, or I get this idea that this original God formulated his decision as to what was good and what was bad.
Right.
And he could have done it completely differently. He could have said, you know, killing people is great, you know?
Yeah.
And that would have been the standard of good, but he didn't, you know? He set certain standards. And then moving on from that, when you get these individual instances of source, they don't or God, they don't necessarily have to play ball and agree with the original decision of what is good. So yes, you could start getting angels and demons, couldn't you?
Yeah, I think that's interesting to go back to something you brought up earlier about. You attribute it to me, but it's actually Jordan Peterson's, the idea that morality, that making a choice, it doesn't matter what choice, any choice you make is to select one thing out of an infinite number of alternatives. So any choice is a moral action. Just like God said, I created the world and I stepped back and saw that it was good. Each time that we act, we're doing that. We're saying this is good because I chose it. I picked it out of all the choices. It's the best. That's a moral judgment. And
you can equally look at something and say, that's crap, I'm rejecting it.
Yes.
But if you look at something and say, that's crap, I love it, you've just gone and established, you know, if God did that at the very beginning, if God had stood back and said, you know, those fish are crap, great, you know, that would have been his create, keep the bar low,
right?
Yeah. Now, can you get from that to Genesis 6? Because Genesis 6 starts off with the idea that the sons of the true God, which my Bible says that is a Hebrew idiom that refers to angels again.
You see it in Job.
Sons of God came down to the earth and had sex with the daughters of men.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me read because it's only 4 lines. It goes like this. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and took them wives all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Then it says, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. And pretty much immediately after this, the Noah story kicks in. God destroys the world. So I'm with you, Daniel. I'm with you that the sons of God clearly implies that something like angels came down and had sex with mortals and created hybrid creatures. You can see some people say that their children were giants, and that's not exactly what the Bible says. It just says there were giants in the earth in those days.
Interesting word phrasing there, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So this is
that's one of those problem verses, isn't it?
It is.
Were the giants already there and then they had children, or were the giants the actual children themselves? Yeah.
Right. Now, the weirdest part about this is one of my favorite parts of the Bible, bar none, and this is all it says. It doesn't say anything else about the Nephilim, the giants, the sons and daughters of the hybrid offspring of angels and men. We never hear anything else about this. This is all we get in the Bible. It turns out that there are holy books that weren't included in the Bible. The Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees are both books that tell the deeper story of the hybrid children of angels and men. So we can jump into that. But what are your thoughts on this, just on the surface?
Right. So I think there's some truth to this. I definitely think there is an underlying story. Whether or not it actually is a case of, let me just bring up whether it is actually a case of angels coming down to earth and doing the deed with humans, I don't know. But there is definitely something going on. There is definitely some connection there between the angelic realm, if you like, and the earthly realm. Now, I've even heard people talk about these angels as being almost like aliens, for want of a better word. Other forms of life that sort of live on a different dimension or out there somewhere. And that this could even have been what we would today say was some kind of genetic experiment, effectively, of a merging of one nature and another. And of course, you've got a lot of the stories about giants, aren't there, that come through mythology. So I think there's something there. I just don't necessarily think it sort of reflects accurately what actually happened.
Well, I wonder if it's a metaphor, and I'm bending my mind on this, but I'm wondering if a marriage between the spiritual beings and the earthly beings, that's something like what a human being is, partly divine and partly material, partly conscious and partly unconscious, and so, but why human beings would appear like that, generations and generations deep, why were they not like this? Why were they not described like this from Adam on? Why only before Noah do we have this union of spirit and matter? I don't know that argument goes very, very far.
No, because you would have thought certainly from a point of view of the spirit, mind, and the animal body, that's effectively sort of summed up with the Genesis chapter 3 story, isn't it? This seems to be more a case of an external life form actually, well, that it is what it says. It's actually having sex with humans. So, see, as a Jehovah's Witness, we used to believe that Satan, the devil, which was the original serpent, basically went round a load of angels in heaven and said, look at those girls down there. Pretty good looking, aren't they? Let's go down and grab ourselves a few.
Yep.
And I think it's in Peter, the book of Peter, the letter of Peter. He talks about the angels, or it might have been Jude, can't remember now. One of those two books says about the angels that forsook their original dwelling place.
Yeah,
I don't know. I think at the moment I'm out on that one. I'm still sort of working through it. I've not really got a very clear idea of what I believe with that.
Let me throw this in there, and you tell me what you think of this. If we go to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, if you remember this, in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, we have an angel who appears at the house of a righteous person and asks to be sheltered there, and the town comes out and says, bring them out. We want to know them. And you don't find out till later that it's an angel, you know?
Yep.
But what you have is a story of a human being asking to have sex with an angel. And what happens after that is fire and brimstone. You know, God retaliates.
That's interesting. I'm going to look at that because as a Jehovah's Witness, I was never taught that the ones that went to the door and asked, you know, bring them out because I was never taught they were angels. I was just taught they were. Yeah, please, yeah, because that would make a huge difference to the story.
Yeah, I'm going to look it up. But I guess the reason I bring that up at all is because what you see in chapter 6 of Genesis is the same story. Mortal people and angels having sex, God getting upset and flooding in the deluge. Noah's flood comes immediately afterwards. Just like when it happens in Sodom and Gomorrah, fire and brimstone. So let me find that passage here. Hold on.
And just while you're finding that, you get from Peter, you get the idea that the angelic forces that were on earth at the time of the flood left, effectively. There's quite a lot of artwork that shows, you know, humans dying at the flood, apart from Noah and his wife and kids in the ark. But these angels kind of leaving and going back to where they came from, which is why later in the Bible account in Job, there's the assembly of God and all the angels come in, and one of them is spoken of as being the Satan that comes forward.
Yep,
that's how we used to be taught it in as a witness.
It's the only other place I know of where the Bible uses the phrase sons of God like that is in Genesis and in Job.
Right. Yes. Yes.
All right. So I think I might have found it here. Let's see. And it came to pass when God destroyed the cities of the plain that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst to overthrow. When he overthrew the cities in which Lot dwelt, and Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains. Hold on, this is not quite right, is it? All right, let's see.
Oh, that's the after the account, isn't it?
Yeah. Hold on, I'll get there. Genesis 19, that's where we are, I think. 19. Okay, let's see. Okay, here it is, right here. And there came 2 angels to Sodom in the evening. And Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and bowed himself and his face towards the ground. And he said, behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house. It says right here, Daniel, they were
what
2
verse is this?
angels. Chapter 19, verse 1 of Genesis. So I'd be interested to hear what your New World, what does the New World say?
Right. So the New World says the 2 angels arrived at Sodom by evening, and Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom, and he went and met them And then it says, actually, let me just put this on screen so you can see it.
Yes. Yeah, angels.
That's probably where I'm getting mixed up. The men of the city came and surrounded the house and kept calling out, "Bring out the men." What
Yes,
does that
and those
say?
men were angels. Yes.
All right. Okay.
So it doesn't seem like if we can tie these two stories together and they're in the same book of the Bible, it sounds like God doesn't take kindly to interbreeding, between the spirit and the material world.
Interesting. Right. I'm going to have to do a bit more on that. Because you see, the thing is, how can I put this? As a Jehovah's Witness, we had this New World Translation Bible, which was great in some areas, but other areas it wasn't so great. It was sort of slanted towards JW doctrine. So sometimes I come across people that are religious, that, they know their Bible. They know their Bible very well, but they know, for example, the King James or the NIV or something else. Mm-hmm. And then I compare it with this one and it says something completely different sometimes, One of the things that it does do, which I don't like at all, is in the New Testament, you don't find any reference to Yahweh in the New Testament beyond maybe that expression praise Jah, which means praise Yahweh or praise Jehovah. But all the way through the New Testament, in the New World Translation, they've put in the name Jehovah. And particularly on occasions where it might look like Jesus was saying he was God.
I see.
They don't like that. So what they've done is they've made it very, very clear, this is not talking about Jesus. It's one example is in the Old Testament, it says, whoever calls on the name of Jehovah will be saved. I think that's Zephaniah. Whoever calls on the name Yahweh will be saved. When you get into the New Testament, it indicates whoever calls on the name of Jesus will be saved.
Right.
But they don't like that. So what they do is they take Jesus out and stick Jehovah in there because it fits with the original verse. Whereas what I think they should be doing is saying, hang on, this is a verse in the New Testament that seems to assign almost the identity of the Jewish God to Jesus himself. And I don't particularly subscribe to the Christendom's version of the Trinity, because my idea of God goes way beyond 3 in 1.
Right.
It's like it's millions in one,
I do think that is, I take that to be symbolic. This is not going to be news to you, but numbers and letters in Hebrew letters have numerical value. And so there's a lot of interesting things with numbers, like, 40 days and 40 nights, 40 years in the desert. That just means a long time. It means ages.
Find as well, 40 is very often associated with judgment as well.
Ooh, interesting.
Whenever you see 40, it's always sort of like a testing period, like Jesus in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights.
Right. Yeah. 40 years wandering the desert for the Jews.
Wandering the desert, exactly. Yeah.
So that's interesting, but this is what it makes me think of. 1 is pretty straightforward symbolically. 2 is not the same as 3, but there are lots of cultures that don't count beyond 3, like primitive cultures, because it goes like this: 1, 2, many. So 3 just means many.
Very good.
That's how I would spin it.
I think now that's interesting, because if we come back to this idea of God or source creating 1, so now you've got mind, you've got God, Then you split off and you get a second mind. There's something special about those first two, isn't there?
I think so.
That isn't perhaps shared by any that come after that. Those first two have got a very dualistic relationship where one depends entirely on the other.
Right.
They're
Yes.
both, yeah. Once you start introducing another and another and another and another, you can see why Scripture would refer to them as sons of God,
I like that.
the
Yeah.
offspring of God, as it were.
Yes.
So yeah, I think the original mind, God, and I think whatever came from God, that first instance that came from God, I think, yeah.
So Daniel, I've got about 5 or 10 more minutes, and
Yeah.
I hate to dominate this. I have one other thing I wanted to run by you. If you got something and you want to go first, please do. But
I just
want
wanted
to
to plug this book.
Oh yeah.
You first.
Hold on. I have now I have all 3 of them.
There we go.
So we'll do that. But you notice what I like to do is to find parallels in other religions to talk about, to flesh out what these ideas might be. And what I noticed is that the story of Prometheus, the Greek story of Prometheus, and the story about the Watchers, right? Now we didn't quite get to that word.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But the Watchers is another word that's used. Let me see if I can find it.
It's in the book of Enoch, and it's also in Daniel, where it talks about a watcher that came down and chopped the tree down.
Yes, and so
Daniel
Watchers is a phrase that's used to talk about angels. It's also it specifically relates to these angels that came down to have sex with human beings. Actually, these were the Watchers. And I want to tell you 2 things about that first. The oldest religious writing that we have in the world is called the Pyramid Text. It goes back to ancient Egypt. It goes back to 2600 BC. And there's a line in the Pyramid Text that says, the great assembly for thee, the Watchers stand before thee. And they're talking about the gods that govern the underworld and the passage from this life to the next. And the ancient Egyptians called them Watchers. The biblical tradition then calls angels Watchers. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there's a line that says, "Deliver thou Osiris, Ani triumphant, from the Watchers who give judgment." Old stories. Now we'll fast forward to the Book of Enoch. Now the Book of Enoch tells us way more about the story in chapter 6, where the angels come down and have sex with mortals, and their children are giants. Well, Enoch, the Book of Enoch, the Book of Enoch, I'll read some of this to you. It says, "And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose wives from among the children of men, and beget us children." And then I'm going to fast forward a little bit, and I'll show you this. It says, "And they were in all 200, so 200 angels, who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And these are the names of their leaders. Simazaz."
Do they all end in L by any chance?
Many of them do. Simazaz, Arakiba, Ramael, Kobakiel, Tamiel, Ramiel, Danel, Ezekiel, Barakiel, and on and on and on. You've got all of these gods by name, but it gets better. It starts
Sons
to talk
of L.
Sons of El.
Yeah.
Sons of El. And,
Connecting the dots.
yes. And now it says once these sons of El were there, they didn't just have sex with women and go. They hung out. They were dad to the children. They were part of the system. And it says they taught them charms and enchantments and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. The angels taught human beings charms, enchantments, the cutting of roots, and the properties of plants. They also They also taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, made known to them the metals of the earth, the art of working them in bracelets and ornaments, the use of antimony and beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones and coloring tinctures. And on and on and on. It says, Ezekiel, the knowledge of the clouds, the signs of the earth, the signs of the sun, the course of the moon, astrology, astronomy. Before these things, Enoch was hidden, and his activities had to do with the watchers. His days were with the holy ones. So this is how Enoch got to learn all this. He went to heaven. The Bible tells us Enoch got picked up and taken to heaven, and he learned all of this stuff. So I tell you that because I want to give you a parallel story. This goes back to the ancient Greek. I will probably mispronounce this guy's name. Aeschylus, maybe? It's 450 BC. The story is called Prometheus Bound. And there are others, but Prometheus Bound. And it was like very poetic. And it was like, okay, so first thing I want to tell you is that when this story introduces Prometheus, it calls him the lover of mankind. Now, Prometheus is a god. And if God is loving mankind in a sexual sense, we have a parallel to the story in Genesis. If it doesn't mean sexual, then I could be off base. But let me continue. It says here, Prometheus said, I sought the font of fire and hollow reed, hid privily and measureless resource, for man and mighty teacher of all the arts. So Prometheus stole fire from heaven and came and gave it to man. That's the story of Prometheus, what he did. But it calls him the mighty teacher of the arts. And I'm not done. It also says, to my sight, thy giant structure rears. So Prometheus is a giant. So now we have another parallel to the book, to the Bible. It gets even better. It says, bringing the mighty ones of old to naught.
Yes.
The mighty ones of old. It says right here, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. That's from the Bible.
Yeah, the Bible talks about the men of fame, doesn't it?
It does indeed. Mm-hmm. All right, so it gets even better. They do refer to God, the gods with a lowercase g, as the sons of heaven, the way we see here the sons of God. But here's where it gets good. In fact, I wrote this down here. This will be easier to find. All right, it goes like this. But utterly without knowledge, moiled, until I, the rising of the stars, showed them. So Prometheus is telling human beings how to read the stars. When they rise and when they set, and gave them writing. I conferred the gift of fire, yea, and shall master many arts thereby. What arts, what aids I cleverly evolved. I taught them to compound draughts and mixtures sanative, wherewith they now are armed against disease. I staked the winding path of divination, and was the first distinguisher of dreams. I led men on the road of dark and riddling knowledge. I purged the glancing eye of fire, and made its meaning plain. Things beneath the earth, aids hid from men, brass, iron, silver, gold. Who dares to say he was before me in discovering? All manner of arts men from Prometheus learned. So you can see how, if you go from Genesis to Enoch, and Enoch talks about the angels teaching mankind all of the secrets of civilization, Prometheus does exactly the same thing in the ancient Greek story.
Yep.
And the punchline, the punctuation to this story is that Prometheus is a Greek word, and he was known in the Roman-speaking world as the bringer of fire. In Latin is Lucifer.
Oh.
Lucifer, by the way,
yeah,
is the morning star. Like, he's called the son of the morning in the Bible. That's the point is, it all comes back.
There's little dots that connect together, isn't there? And when you look at it just from a biblical perspective, it's a very narrow picture. But when you start bringing in Enoch, Plato, all these other sources,
What do you think? What do you think about
Well,
the level of parallels in those stories?
I would like to sum that up, if I may, by
Yes.
reading you a poem
Okay, good.
that I wrote myself under inspiration.
All right.
So it's called Gods and Men, and it goes like this. They arrived on the light one summer's day, through the vortex. Unannounced were they, gods clothed with skin, illustrious within. They stole our daughters, one and all, and by the fall, freakish lives inside began. Once born, they grew and grew. They were unstoppable, part god, part man. Brutal abnormalities, hellish, grotesque monstrosities who made us fall, one and all. They beat us black and blue, and two, their fathers showed us things, inhuman things, forbidden things, and moulded us their way, for they were gods and men who left us then, one autumn day, or so they say, to save themselves, and let us fend alone as men to pray. Alien to our world were they, of light so bright, from the vortex one summer's day.
And Chris saw that it was good, Daniel.
Chris thought it was good. There you go, Chris. And just to plug, this is not my book. This is a super book by Nujon, I think his name is, Nujon Mapson. And you've got 3 other versions there, have you?
Yes, so I think I have the one that you have.
This is the latest one via, just been released via Kickstarter. It's available on Amazon to buy. And there will be a link on my website. And you've got the first 2, haven't you?
Yes, I do. This one looks like it might have been from 2017. It's called just called an anthology.
Very good, that
this
one.
This one, an anthology of the creative mind.
Yeah, and basically what they are, they're sort of free thinkers like yourself and me. And Nujon has basically collected a huge amount of these like lectures and essays, and then spent a lot of time actually putting them all together. And this one, I'm particularly privileged because he's included a couple of my essays in it. So
Absolutely.
I'm like, woohoo!
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm published. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. It was a pleasure, man. Yes.
That chat has been amazing. I'm sure we're going to have many more like it. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I will just speak to you for a few moments more after we finish, but I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us this evening. Thanks for now. Bye.